Student Alliance annual conference in Columbus. The advisor track is geared not only for advisors to help other advisors, but also to help students better interact with their advisors and to help this National Secular Student Alliance figure out how to better help the advisors that we work with for our affiliate groups. So we're glad to have you all here today. The next speaker in our lineup is Corinne Zimmerman. She's from Illinois State University, where she is a professor of psychology, specializing in the development of scientific thinking and evidence-based reasoning, which is not my area, which is why I apparently can't say it. That said, she is the advisor to the SSA at Illinois State University, and her topic today is going to be one that's actually pretty common among our affiliates, which is dealing with leaders who won't let go, helping out with leadership transition. So I will turn it over to Corinne. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey everybody. I've just been the advisor for the past year, and Nick invited me to possibly give a talk because I was apparently quite active in our group, and he said, what can you talk about? And I gave him a list of about 12, and he's like, that one, I want you to do that one. And this is one of those topics that I wouldn't have thought about. I would have thought about leadership transitions, so from year to year, so getting a senior student to make sure their wisdom is handed on to the person who's in junior year, for example. I was thinking along the lines of having to prepare for that, but what I wasn't prepared for initially was the idea that there were going to be previous leaders who weren't ready to give up their positions of leadership. And I've been agonizing for the last week or so about how much of the anecdote that I would want to bother mentioning, depending on who was here, and the fact that it's going to be on YouTube. But just, I think it's probably sufficient to just say that occasionally you will have student members who are allowed to hang around still, because alumni are quite important, right? I've learned this the other day, that the SSA really does value alumni participation. At my university, the SSA falls under the Registered Student Organization, and there's a limit on how much of your membership can be alumni, but they are technically allowed to be part of your student groups. And so there is potentially some control and transition issues that I want to address, but I'm going to do it more or less from a psychological point of view, because that's what I do. So we went through a little bit of trauma this past year, but I'm not going to go into any dirty details because it's, you know, we're on YouTube. Okay, so one of the ways that I've come to think about these issues is with respect to personal identity, and I spend at least twice a semester talking about identity in the various classes that I teach. My students, who are actually sitting here supporting my talk, they will also be talking about the issue of identity a little bit, but from the student perspective tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. So as a professor, I do cover identity development a lot in both my educational psychology classes. This is for people who are going to become teachers, and just for my psych majors. And so the key theories that we talk about are Erikson's lifespan perspective on identity development. So prior to that, Freud said, you know, the way your toilet training happened would indicate how your personality would play out, which is dumb and stupid. Erikson takes more of a lifespan perspective, and in particular, James Marcia also focuses on identity development, especially during the adolescent years. The other thing, as a developmental psychologist, we have been discussing a lot this idea of emerging adulthood. Has anybody here actually heard the phrase emerging adulthood? Well, yeah, the other developmental psychologist in the room. So the thing is, in North America, and by North America I mean United States and Canada and possibly some westernized countries, there is this extended period of adolescence. It used to be the case that, say, 18, you can go to war, you can drink. Well, in my country, you can. There's this transition from adolescence to adulthood, but we're having this very extended sort of, it's not an extended adolescence, we've decided to call it emerging adulthood. So we do see a lot of identity development that we might have previously expected to happen during high school also happening through the college years. So I tend to look at a lot of things through the lens of identity and identity development, and just these phrases, if you're interested, these are, you're right, that doesn't show up very well. Exploring what your possible choices are, your career choices, your political choices, all those sorts of things, and then whether you actually commit to them or not. So when we think about our student members, we have to think of them as emerging adults who are still doing a lot of identity transition. the other key point that I want to make on this slide is the idea that secularism, atheism, and the like, this is a kind of identity activism, right? So in the same way, if we think about the LGBTQ movement and others, it is about, you know, being able to come out as an atheist and be respected and all of that. We've been talking about that a lot this weekend. So the idea of identity, I think, is an especially important one to think about when you're involved in an identity activism movement. Does that make sense? So, okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is the idea that a lot of transitions are happening with students. I know that some of the advisors here, I think, are involved with high school groups, or there is the move towards getting high school SSAs. That's true. She's nodding. Good. So we do watch our students go through lots of transitions, high school to college, college to the world of work. One of the things I especially want to emphasize on my last slide is going to be about the transition from being a college SSA person to being a member of the broader secular community, and how those transitions we could help people who aren't willing to let go of their SSA leadership positions by being able to tell them about some of the opportunities that exist after college. So I want to talk about that. There's also, we obviously deal with transitions from religion to secularism. And so through transitions, any kind of transition also involves changes in identity. And everybody smiled at that. There's a Japanese study on the power of cute. Everybody's brain's working a little more. Somebody else did this morning. They did my trick. Okay, I realize it's not my trick. I stole it from somebody else. Okay, so while we've got these transitions, leadership's transitions from, say, vice president to president, from president to alumni member, or, you know, trying to allow the other person to take on the leadership, we have to go through some issues of identity. And the key thing, as I analyzed what our group was going through this past year, I spent a good week and some talking about motivation in some of my classes. There's a lot of theories of motivation. I don't know if anybody's taken intro psych. There's a ton of them, and especially with my education majors, I cover a lot of theories because being a teacher, one of the key issues is how do I keep my students motivated, right? So we do cover a lot of different elements of motivation. What I want to talk about with respect to thinking about clubs and groups is like fundamental theories of motivation. If you know the area, this is like the DC and Ryan model. So what they suggest is that there are three key things that fundamentally motivate human beings. The need to belong is probably the most fundamental. So I've known about this for some time. I think about the theory as the need to belong, but it's also need for relatedness. And you can think about that sense of community, and that's come up a lot this weekend too, the idea that when people transition from religion to secularism, one of the things that goes away is community. So we need to think about the idea that a fundamental human need we have is for belongingness, and so within our clubs, those transitions, we want to make our alumni members still feel welcome and valued, and I'm going to mention that again. Control and autonomy is the really big one, especially when you're thinking about leadership transitions, right? Because you've got a person who may have been in charge of setting the agenda, running the meetings, those sorts of things, having input on who you're going to bring in as speakers, who then has to hand the reins over to somebody else, and that's hard to do. For some people who, it's a very difficult thing to give up control. And again, one of our fundamental human needs is the need to experience choice, control, autonomy, that kind of thing. So the other one is the competence. I wanted all three. That's why I have 3 puppies. So if you're going to remember, like, the 3 things about motivation, what motivates us: control, competence, and belongingness or relatedness. So again, a previous leader may have felt competent and in control, and they were really good at that, and now they may not be in that position. And so we have to think about these fundamental motivators while we're dealing with the transitions. So basically what I'm trying to provide the other advisors in the room, and possibly some of the student leaders if there are some here, and I know there are, is when this is happening, think a little bit like a psychologist. Go ahead and put on a psychologist hat. I mean, we all kind of fancy ourselves to be lay psychologists, right? Because we're people, right? We know people. But this is the these are the actual terms that you can use as you discuss this with your groups. Jargon, that's the word I was looking for, jargon. Okay, so I came up with a list of some actual practical suggestions for when you're dealing with, I like the fact that I'm talking in vague terms, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So when you're dealing with past leaders, check into what the role of alumni are in your SSA. I didn't really know this, I didn't know enough about the SSA until the trivia night to know that alumni obviously are very valued in the larger SSA. Like I said, your school may have rules about student clubs and how much alumni can participate, so make sure to check into that. If there is reasonable, you can have a reasonable number of alumni. Think about the composition and what roles those people will play. So could you possibly get somebody to take on the role of alumni relations? What about something like being a mentor to younger students? There are ways that you can get those people involved, but what we've learned through trial and error is I think that it needs to be done very explicitly. Those transitions need to be done explicitly, and I think it's important to make them feel valued. And when you put it in that fundamental human motivation framework, we can be very, I guess, explicit about this. Then what I had hinted at previously was how do we transition to non-campus secularism? One of the things, we have a meetup group in our town, Bloomington Normal Freethinkers. So you could possibly let students know about community groups, and again, for that sense of belongingness. Secular Woman, I'm here also representing Secular Woman. I'm on the board of directors. We've started an affiliate group program, so you can start your own local community and affiliate with us in the same way. In fact, we use the SSA as a model for how we did our affiliate program, so there are parts of your website I know quite well. So there's some, and the national organization is largely a virtual presence right now, but we have a very active members group on Facebook. Men are welcome, by the way. He's a member. Men are welcome, so that's another organization that we can direct students and alumni to. And actually, we have a free membership drive for students in October, so we'll probably be doing a little more recruiting there. Center for Inquiry obviously has some of the local affiliates. I don't know as much about them, only through some friends of mine. Getting your hands dirty, like with things like Camp Quest, so we talked about that on Friday night, like actually getting your hands dirty at camp. Going out and thinking about the next generation of kids. The Recovering from Religion organization just started the hotline project that you guys may or may not know about. I was just talking to one of the people involved, and they were hoping for, I don't know, something like 30 to 50 volunteers, and they got 300 or something. So this is going to be something that students who are and alumni who are interested in secular issues could be able to say with being trained for the hotline for people who are questioning their faith. So it's going to be a 24-hour hotline project. So go Google that and possibly get involved. But that's just, I couldn't only fit that many logos on here, and there's obviously others. There's people tabling out there. So if we do think about our jobs as not just, see, for me as an educator, I do think about my students while they're students, but I do try to think ahead to what do I want my students to know or to be when I run into them 5 years from now at Disneyland. So I think as advisors, we can also think not just about the present composition of our student groups, but where do we want these students to transition to in the community on a bigger scale. So I said all of that very diplomatically, I think, didn't I? That was good? Yeah. Okay, that's it. Oh, and I was just gonna, I wanted us to possibly have time for discussion, conversations. I know that some of the talks, we haven't had a chance to ask questions, but I'd like to be able to field any. Yeah. 5 minutes. Plenty of time. Yeah.
I've been having problems with an officer. He was president last year, but now he's a senior.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not even out of the college yet. And he's trying to get his hands in a lot of things that we want to do.
and doesn't like our ideas and he's trying to thwart our ideas. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. It's difficult. I mean, part of the reason that I think Nick wanted me to talk about this, and the reason I was very willing to, was because I didn't realize that it was going to be difficult. And so I think it's important for student leaders and student advisors to know that it is going to be difficult, and this might be just one of those times where you actually ours came to a head, and I just had to have a lot of heart-to-heart conversations with people that said, look, you're done as the decision maker. You can have input, we value your input, but ultimately the new leadership is in charge. So I had to step in as advisor, right? Because things got a little bit too not get your advisor involved. And if it's the case that your advisor doesn't feel, see, the thing is, I'm comfortable with this stuff because I have a background in psychology, and I can analyze and understand the situations in terms of things like identity, motivation, control, autonomy, and I can talk to them that way. So if your advisor doesn't necessarily have the skills or the inclination to want to talk in that sort of, go find a psychology professor because they love doing this kind of stuff. But just be aware of the fact that you're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. And email me if you need more tips or advice. Yep.
I just want to return to that point about explicitness. I mean, looking back on the situation we dealt with, had we seen it coming, there'd have been explicit roles, identities, definitions of who people were and what they were supposed to do more up front. I think we just assumed that people would fit into their new places. So being really explicit about what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what someone should be doing, it's probably still going to lead to a massive argument.
Well, and it's going to depend on the personality. So, for example, in our group, we have somebody who's a lovely member who is involved with some of the alumni, who very easily transitioned from being a student to a community member, who is invited to certain events, like say, like an Ask an Atheist panel or things like that. So, with that person, there was no need to worry. So, I mean, if you get to know your people well enough, you might know what personality conflicts are likely to happen. So if you do sort of think about it's like an active personnel management kind of thing, and know that it is think about the fact that is something that could happen, and be explicit. I mean, just use your spidey senses, I guess. Yeah.
So I would think that, at least this is sort of the case with our group, is that most of our alumni actually move on. So even if they wanted to stay involved, they're not even in the city anymore. So do you have any idea of what's the typical percentage of your students that actually stay at least a little bit longer so that they could be involved?
I honestly, I don't have a lot of data. Our university is situated in a town where there's a large industry that a lot of people may go on to work at. And so that might be more typical depending on the region that your school is in. So I think this is probably more relevant for groups where people are likely to stay within the community. And it is very difficult to transition out of something. Steve's sort of a co-advisor. He was talking about bulletin boards when he was an undergraduate, and there was like virtual hangout place.
Didn't have the internet when I was an undergraduate.
Oh, okay.
There was a general issue where I used to work in England, that we had a bulletin board that undergraduates, this is where they hung out, this is where they had conversations. And when they graduated, they said, and this is all the students in the program, they said, we want access, this is where we hang out, this is where we have conversations with our friends. And we said, well, no, you've graduated, you can't use this resource anymore. And
so you get 1 week and then you're done, right? Yeah. And that's not the kind of transition that we're good at, right? Because of those things like belongingness so knowing that there's going to have to be that kind of transition, I think is helpful. So I just feel better prepared for this now, knowing that there's two different kinds of leadership transitions to have to be aware of.
A thought that I'm sort of having hearing this and seeing sort of a wider spectrum of groups is that this also may be something that you have an opportunity to model now, so that as future generations of leadership move through that transition, they've seen this is what it should look like, and that expectation is being set that you're a leader for a year and then you step out of that leadership role. And I think may pose sort of in reverse this may pose more danger for younger groups because they don't have that existing model.
Exactly. We're only been 1 year as an affiliate, an official SSA affiliate, and so I think with my current leadership, I am not worried. And now that we've been through this, we will know how to do the role transitions and how to model things for the younger students joining. So, yeah. So, I'm really looking forward to the next year. Right? Hi, everybody.
Thank you very much. We are